Feeling burned out on 5e? Maybe it's too crunchy, or not crunchy enough. Maybe you want something deadlier, darker, more story-based, or just plain different. I'm going to break down some of the best alternatives based on your biggest frustrations so you can finally find the game that fits your style today on Daddy Rolled a 1. Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Martin. This is another video in my series on independent tabletop role-playing games, but it's also going to be part of my series on the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and it's going to include some DM advice, because what I'm talking about here are alternatives to playing the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons, whether you call that 5e or whether you call it the 2024 edition or what have you. We're going to be discussing some other types of things that you can try if you've grown dissatisfied with those systems. So a lot of players came into the hobby over the past, I'd say 5 or 6 years even. And there were a lot of reasons for this. The popularity of Stranger Things, the popularity of Critical Role, seeing Dungeons & Dragons depicted in a very positive light on shows like Big Bang Theory or Young Sheldon. And then, of course, the pandemic lockdowns where people were looking for other things to do. All those things kind of happened in a very short window of time, and it brought a lot of new people into the hobby. And most of those new people did start with 5th edition. But now that it's been, over 5 years since a lot of these folks got into the hobby, they're starting to see some things that maybe they don't like about that system, or maybe they just want to try something different. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I will point out that if you are an old timer like me and you watch my channel for the history videos, this is the perfect chance for you to share why you like playing older editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Even if you're not currently playing them, maybe you remember it as being a kid and you would hope that other people want to play that style of game. This is your opportunity to share that kind of discussion in the comments below to try to explain why you like the types of games that you like, those older style of games. I would ask, if you do that though, please be constructive. So a comment like, I prefer playing 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons because 5e is trash, that's not helpful. It's not constructive. And in the comments, when you're talking about the games you like, there's going to be no reason to denigrate and talk down about 5e, because remember, you're already talking to people that are looking to get away from 5e. So spend your time focusing on the things that you like about the editions that you like and why you think that that's a good thing for those people to want to play, rather than just laundry listing all the things that you don't like about 5e, because again, it's not really relevant to the discussion here. So I think that one of the ways that we need to talk about getting into some of these other systems is looking at what some of the barriers might be. And after we do that, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down, I've done a list of 6, sort of like what I'm calling pain points, the 6 kind of things that maybe you don't like about 5e that would cause you to look for another type of system. Okay, but first, as far as talking about the barriers, I think that there's a list, right? But the 3 I think that are the most common barriers for getting into other systems. And this video is going to focus on sort of what people call OSR or old school systems, as well as the actual original earlier editions of the game of Dungeons & Dragons, like the official published ones, and then the old school Renaissance OSR style games, and then a little bit of like OSR adjacent, like games that aren't trying to replicate an earlier edition, but instead are taking sort of modern mechanics and putting a different spin on it with an old school flair. And then we're going to get into also some games that are completely not old school at all, or even related to Dungeons & Dragons, and talk about those as well. But as far as the barriers, I think the first one can be as far as like just defining what is the old school Renaissance and what are these kinds of games and what can I expect by getting into them? So the places where I would start with that is there is a document, I think it's just called the Primer of Old School Gaming. And that was sort of the original document that was written to kind of talk about like, these are the principles that old school gamers kind of adhere to and what you can expect in these style of games. It was later expanded to something called the Principia Apocrypha. And so you can find that as well. But I think the original one is just shorter. It's more succinct and it gets right to the point. The primer for old school gaming. And then also I did do a video on sort of the history of the OSR. I called it like, what is the OSR and why should I care? And that is going to cover in much more detail some of that background stuff. So you can check that video out. It's not necessary to have seen that to watch this video, but it is a good companion if you want more details. Okay, so the next barrier I think would be, where do I start? It can be overwhelming there because there are so many different games. 5e has, 5e, it's a system and you play that game. But when you start to look beyond that, there are just, dozens, if not hundreds of different types of games that you can look at. And so that's what this video is for. This video is to try to help you kind of understand, like, what are the things that you're frustrated with, and then how do I address that and find a game that addresses that frustration? Okay, so this isn't going to be an exhaustive list of games. I'm just going to highlight like a few games in each category to kind of give you a flavor of it. And then, you can kind of do your own research, check out the comments below. Hopefully people will be suggesting games that address these different pain points that I talked about. Now, the third one can be a little bit tricky, but again, if you're an old timer like me, and as people get older, we tend to be a little bit more dogmatic in our approach to things that we like. And, anything that we don't like, we'll say it's like the worst thing ever, right? So I try not to do that. I try to be very open, but we all fall prey to that. And sometimes that can come across as being very closed-minded to other people's points of view, because you get so close to the thing that you love that you can't understand why people also don't love it. And you also don't want people to try to change it. You want it to stay exactly the way that it is. And you want them to play the system the way that you play it, because that is, quote unquote, the right way of playing. So I think just a quick analogy here. I have a teenage daughter. She's 15 and she's already hitting that point. And if you have been a teenager at the point, or you have teenagers in your household, you know what I'm talking about here is that discovery of music. And then that point you hit when people start to like music that you liked 2 or 5 or 10 years ago, and you get upset. I did it when I was a kid. And then there's that whole, like, I listened to him first kind of thing. I don't know why we do that, but like everybody does it. And it's just, it's such a rite of passage to claim that, like, this is your thing. This is my music. And you're not allowed to like this music because I liked it first. Go find your own thing. And I think that there is a little bit of that in these communities of people. There's kind of like, I like the people that I play with now, and I don't want new people coming into play. I think that's honestly very close-minded. Having more people and different viewpoints is always a good thing. And, you might learn something. So I try to keep an open mind, but just beware that there can be communities out there that are a little closed off. And my suggestion would be, don't spend time arguing with those people. Don't get upset. Just move on and try to find a community that appeals to you. And if you need help, just go ahead and send me an email, or you can hit me up. I'm always open to direct messaging on, like, say, Instagram, my Instagram account, or Blue Sky, something like that, and say, like, hey, where can I find a space that is welcoming of people like me and the kinds of games that I like to play? And I can do my best to help you find one, or put you in touch with someone. Okay, so that is kind of like my short little intro here. And I would like to ask you that if that's kind of content you enjoy, if you like hearing about independent tabletop role-playing games, if you like the history of Dungeons and Dragons and how it relates to all these other games, and if you like this DM advice of how you can implement some of the changes from these games and in different games, things like that, then please remember to like this video, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel if you're not already, and hit that bell icon to ensure that you're going to be notified when I upload new videos like this one. I will say that I've had a couple people in the comments point out that they had hit the bell icon, and yet YouTube was not alerting them when I was uploading new videos. Now, the two reasons for that, I guess I could see, are, I believe now in the bell icon, there are different categories of things of, like, when you want to be notified. And I guess you'd want to hit the one that says all things, and that way you'll see everything. So maybe double check that you've selected that one. The other thing is, I did take some time off and December and January after all of my personal stuff happened when my dad passed away and I had to plan his memorial service and clean out his apartment. And then our house had to be evacuated in the middle of all that because of all these horrible fires that we had in January here in Southern California. If you have any kind of access to news, you know what I'm talking about. They were horrific. And so we were gone for a while because and I just, I didn't feel right about doing something that makes me feel good, like recording videos and stuff. Well, it's work. I also have fun doing it. And so I took some time off. And I think because of that, the algorithm kind of was like, oh, he's not making new videos. And so when I started uploading again, I think some of those maybe just didn't bubble up to the surface. So if this is the first video that you've seen from me in a while, today is March 24th of 2025. Well, just know that I began resuming my schedule in like mid-January. So if you've not seen one from me for a while, make sure to go back and check them out so that you don't miss some of the cool videos that I put out during that time. Okay, so I'm going to dive in now to our first little section here. And I, again, do want to encourage you to think about when you're leaving 5th edition, if that is what you're doing, or maybe you're considering it, think about why. What are the things that are causing you to want to, your frustrations that are causing you to want to leave? And there are people that are going to do it for a variety of reasons. So the reason that you don't like it is not always going to match up with another frustration that someone else has. But hopefully this video will help you kind of identify those things and figure out where you can go from here. And I would love for you to just leave in the comments and mention like what are some of the things that you are having problems with and why you're considering leaving 5e. Or maybe, again, you found a game that you think addresses those things, and then share that. Share the love for those independent publishers so they can get their work out in the public more. Okay, so the first of the pain points that I'm going to discuss, and again, this is going to be focused on sort of OSR and classic D&D games, but I will be mentioning other systems from time to time. The first pain point is going to be the idea that 5e is too crunchy. There's too many mechanics. There's too many things to, you're optimizing your character and you want a more streamlined game. Okay, so this is a common complaint that I hear from time to time. So the good news is there are a lot of systems that can help address that. It will stay within that sort of Dungeons and Dragons realm and the things that you're used to, class and level systems, the 6 ability scores, that kind of thing. So to start off, there are a lot of games within the OSR community that are based on this version of Dungeons and Dragons, the 1981 Moldvay BX. I've mentioned before, this is the system I started with back in 1981, late 81. And a lot of OSR systems are based on this game. So that would include things such as Old School Essentials. Okay, so this is the version of the game that I'm running for my daughter and her friends. I mean, I use my BX stuff, like my old models and stuff, but this is the one I have at the table, partly because I just don't want to ruin my old box. Okay, but Old School Essentials is what is known as a retro clone, which is just using... Originally, what they did was use the open game license from the 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons to retroactively recreate original versions of the game, old versions of the game. And Old School Essentials of the retro clones is probably the closest to its inspirational system, which was Moldvay BX 1981 Basic Dungeons and Dragons. So it makes almost no changes to that. So this is the one that I use. Great layout. You guys have seen this on the channel before, hopefully. But this is what I use. So if you want to learn to play Old School Essentials, the good news is they have a free system reference document online. You can find it at the Necrotic Gnome website. There'll be links for all of this stuff in the show notes. But you can get the basic version of the rules essentially for free. Okay, so you'd have to, print it out if you wanted to, unless you want to just read it off a tablet or a laptop at the table. And then, of course, they have hardback versions of the books. They also have these older versions, which are like box sets. So they have something like this. This is the one that I got first. And each little book is kind of like its own thing. So this is the core rules. And then this is the genre rules. So this is what has your classes and races and things like that. And then you've got your spells, etc. You've got monsters. And then the last book is treasure. So you can buy it in that format. You can buy it as a tome. You can buy PDFs. You can buy Advanced Fantasy, which is a whole other thing. I'm not going to get into that now, but that's something else that you can tack on top of this. As far as a first adventure, I would recommend this one, The Incandescent Grottos. It's by Gavin Norman, who is the person who wrote Old School Essentials. So he's very familiar with the system. But these adventures are so fun because, again, they're kind of like a little bit bigger than digest size. But this is a very fun kind of, I just love the art, kind of, classic fantasy adventure, lots of mushrooms. You've got your rumors and treasures and area descriptions and all this stuff. It's an entry-level adventure, super easy to run. Everything's like, bullet points. Everything that you need to know about this section is on these 2 pages. So there's not a lot of page flipping. So I would recommend this one. Although there are a ton of adventures for this system for BX. So again, this video isn't intended to list all of those. But you could use this with like any of the old like B series or the X series of modules from the TSR days, and they work exactly 100% well with this system, if that's something that you're into. Okay. So Old School Essentials really, I'd say, is best for players who are looking for a clean, organized version of classic BX D&D with lots of really creative modular expansion options. Like I said, Advanced Fantasy, they have their Carcass Crawler zine that adds new races and classes and things like that coming out constantly. So that's Old School Essentials. Now, Basic Fantasy is another one. Basic Fantasy role-playing game is available for free as a PDF. So they'll just give you the PDF for free. They want people to play this game. And then if you want a print copy, you can get it for cheap. It's basically, they don't tack on any extra costs. You're paying just the printing and shipping costs if you buy it. So a while ago, it was like $5. And again, I don't know if that's what it is now, but you can find it in a lot of different places. Super easy to learn, based on Basic Fantasy or Basic D&D from 1981, which is why the game's called Basic Fantasy. And, it does make some changes. So unlike Old School Essentials, the Basic Fantasy does make a few changes, like it separates race and class as an example, whereas in original Basic D&D from 1981, as an example, elf is a class. Or dwarf is a class, that kind of thing. Basic Fantasy separates them out, so you could mix and match between your race and your class. First adventure, I think a great one to start would be Morgan's Fort, which is you can get it for free again as well. And Basic Fantasy, I think, is great for those who want like an old school experience, but they want some modern mechanics. They want ascending armor class and modern kind of like just usability of putting it together. So that is another example of a game that you can move to if you think that 5e is too crunchy. Okay, so moving along, another game that would help deal with this idea of rules being too crunchy in 5e is the Black Hack. So this is now getting farther removed from the Dungeons and Dragons rules and mechanics that inspired some of these OSR games, but it is still in that realm. So there is a second edition of Black Hack out. It is a streamlined OSR game with modern twists. You can find most of the rules on the Black Hack website from the creator, talks about like the mechanics and things like that. And a great adventure would be, I think there's one in the core rule book called it's like a dungeon, a sample dungeon, and a lot of people use that as their original adventure. But there's a ton of adventures for Black Hack. There's a whole compendium. It's called the Trilemma Volume 1 Compendium. It's by Michael Prescott, and there's a bunch of different adventures in there that are short, quick, easy to use. So that's a great idea of something you could pick up to use as a starting adventure for the Black Hack. So it's really, I'd say Black Hack is great for people who want some OSR mechanics, but they want a super lightweight rule set. And again, sort of these modern sensibilities of presentation of design, but also, as an example, it uses like advantage and disadvantage. And so a lot of people associate that mechanic with 5e. 5e was not the first game to use that, but it's where it became the most popular because Dungeons & Dragons is the most popular game. So definitely check out Black Hack if you're looking for something that's even more streamlined and rules light than something like Old School Essentials. And then sort of this in-between game, I think, where people who are kind of trying to move along the route would be Five Torches Deep. So you can get Five Torches Deep. You can order it, and it's not that expensive. You can order print copies or, of course, PDFs. It is really, I would say, it's OSR meets 5e design. So it is 5e mechanics, I'll put it that way, but it strips out a lot of the stuff and tries to replace it with things that emulate more of an OSR style. So the great news with Five Torches Deep is that it can run old school adventures, original ones that were written back in the 70s and 80s. With, you have to make some modifications, but you can do that pretty easily. And you can also use it to run, say, 5e adventures, but using them in a much more, it's more dangerous. It's a deadlier game. And that was kind of the intent. And it uses resource management, all that kind of stuff. I mean, just the name of the game, Five Torches Deep, is evoking this idea of you're going to have to be doing things like tracking your light resources and stuff like that. So it's a really good bridge game for 5e players who want to kind of shift over to OSR mechanics, but they don't want to dive in whole hog quite yet. They're not quite ready. And it's definitely going to simplify the mechanics from a 5e style of game. All right, so there's a bunch of places that you can find that discuss these games online, but there are forums. Basic Fantasy Role-Playing Game has its own forums. So that's super helpful for new players that are getting into that. And then I know a lot of people use Reddit. I will admit I'm not great at using Reddit, but I try to dabble from time to time and kind of figure it out. But I find it a little bit confusing, just truth be told, because I guess I'm an old Luddite or something. But there is a subreddit for OSR, and you can find those. Again, I'll put links to these when they're available in the show notes. But the OSR Reddit I've been in probably the most active. And, you just kind of have to watch people. You'll get a sense of what people are like, and then, focus on the content that you think is cool there. Okay, so let's move on to pain point number 2. And this is going to be the exact opposite of what we just talked about. So these are the people who are playing 5e and think that it's not crunchy enough. They want more crunch, more complexity. Well, I really think that the gold standard of that is going to be this version of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. So if you watched my last video, I got this book in the mail from a viewer who noticed that this was the only of the original 3 books, The Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and Dungeon Master's Guide, where I didn't have the original cover. I had like a later printing cover. And so he sent this to me, Dungeon Master's Guide for First Edition Advanced D&D 1979. I know a lot of people have this sort of misconception or this notion that earlier editions of Dungeons & Dragons, or sort of, what people would say TSR era editions of Dungeons & Dragons, are the rules light, or that OSR in general is rules light. And that is a complete misconception. So just like any other there are different styles of OSR games that run the gamut from very complex all the way to very, very rules light and everything in between. And they're all considered OSR style games. I mean, some people would quibble about that, but I'm going to consider them all OSR style games. So Advanced D&D is one of the more complex games that are out there, and it was written for that purpose. It was written because Gary Gygax, a lot of different reasons, right? So again, we're not going to get into all those reasons, but one of the goals of Gary Gygax doing this was to write a rule for any conceivable thing that might come up during a game so that a dungeon master didn't have to make up the rules. That is kind of antithetical to the rulings not use rules mantra of OSR style games, which is more in line with the 1981 basic set. But Advanced D&D isn't like that, but it would still be considered an old school game. Okay, so what you would need to learn this would be, of course, the first edition Player's Handbook. You would need the Dungeon Master's Guide, and you would need the Monster Manual. For First Edition, you can get all of those on DriveThruRPG as PDFs, and I think print-on-demand copies are available for all those. You can try to find out-of-print stuff like on eBay. They just are very, very expensive. Okay, so your best bet if you want to try to learn this is to find that I would start with the PDFs just to kind of make sure that you dig it before springing for the print-on-demand copies, unless you're just interested in that era of gaming in general. lots of great first adventures, and I meant to pull these off the shelf and I forgot, but I'm just going to keep going here. So N1 Against the Cult of the Reptile God is a great starting adventure for first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, as is, I would say, T1, probably people think that's the gold standard Village of Hamlet. And then one of my personal favorites would be U1, Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. All of those are created for first to third level characters. And the letters just stand for like where, at the time, like N stood for novice, T stood for Temple of Elemental Evil, and U stood for underwater. Okay, so because they were all parts of series of adventures. Okay, so you don't really need to worry about that. But those are all great starting adventures, and they're classics, and you can use them with Advanced D&D. Now, a lot of people would say, "Oh, well, what about B2 Keep on the Borderlands?" That's the classic starting adventure. It absolutely is. That was actually written for the basic version of Dungeons and Dragons, that magenta colored box that I showed you earlier. So if you want to run B2 Keep on the Borderlands, I would suggest using Old School Essentials, not Advanced D&D. You can run it with Advanced D&D, but you'd have to make a few modifications on the fly. Okay, so now let's talk about some more kind of these complex games. Well, Hackmaster is a fun one. So I'm not going to get into the history of this game. I covered that in that other video I talked about earlier, like what is the OSR and why should I care? But Hackmaster 4E is very heavy on crunch. It is based on Advanced D&D from the first edition, and then just dialing up all the complexity. So a great first adventure on that is one that's called Little Keep on the Borderlands. So that was written specifically for Hackmaster, and it is a fun adventure. Definitely recommend checking that out. So I would say that it's best for gamers who enjoy deep mechanics. They want some gritty realism, and it is humorous. So it has a humorous tone, but it is still kind of hardcore. Advanced D&D First Edition is really like talking about like the subsystems in here, just to give you a sense of the complexity. I'm mentioning this now because it does influence the direction of Hackmaster. But the idea of like, one, there's no unified mechanics. So some things are done on a percentage basis. Some are based on an X and 6. Some are based on a 2d6 curve. Some are based on rolling a d20 and rolling high. Some are based on rolling a d20 and rolling low. You have combat that, you have your turn that's broken into rounds, which most people are used to. Well, Advanced D&D breaks the round down even further into segments. So each segment is determined based on a variety of different factors, but that is going to determine when in the round do you get to act. It's not just based on your initiative. It's also based on the kind of weapon you're using, how fast that weapon is, how much space you need to wield that weapon. And then you have a subsystem for like weapon versus armor class, meaning how good is this weapon against attacking people with that specific armor class? But when they say armor class, they don't mean the actual active armor class that you would note on your sheet. They mean the armor class of the armor that you're wearing. However, that's never explained. You're just supposed to intuit that from reading these rules. So there are certain weapons like daggers are better against chainmail than they are against other kinds of armor versus versus plate mail. So there are factors that change how good a certain weapon is. Like certain bludgeoning weapons are better against certain types of armor than against others. And all of that is on these like complex tables. All of the combat in here is done based on tables on attack matrices. I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, you can look in the appendix in here, and they use THAC0. So not really. I know a lot of people have that idea. It was starting to go in that direction, but the tables in here aren't really THAC0. One of my followers and viewers, and is someone that I've known for a long time in the D&D community, is a guy named Mark Clover behind Creative Mountain Games. And he has a podcast called the OK Grognard Show. And also it's a podcast and a YouTube video. He has a whole video where he talks about like why the appendix in here that people think is THAC0 or to hit AC 0 is not what they think it is. And so I'm just going to direct you to him. But it's very complicated. So upcoming, I will be doing a whole video on the differences between Advanced D&D and original D&D. I've started the series. I've already covered the Monster Manual Player's Handbook. I'll be doing one on the DM's Guide, and you'll get to see at that point just how complicated and complex this system is. Okay, so another complex system is going to be this. This is Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition, which came out in 2003. So third edition came out in 2000, and by 2003, they were already revising it. And I'm going to throw in Pathfinder 1E, first edition of Pathfinder, which came out in 2009, I think it was, shortly after fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons came out. So if you want to talk about complex, these are your games if you also like modern mechanics. So you can get the 3.5 Player's Handbook on DriveThruRPG as, again, at least as a PDF. I don't know if they have a POD available, but you can also find used copies of the 3.5 books relatively reasonable. I mean, they're like less than half the cost of like something like this. Okay. So that's also an option. And then same thing with Pathfinder. So you can get the Pathfinder core rulebook for first edition. Make sure you're looking at first edition. I'm not really all that familiar with second edition Pathfinder. I mean, I know a little bit about it, but I don't have it. But the first edition core rulebook for Pathfinder, you can get the PDF on Paizo Publishing's website. They're the ones who publish this. And but they don't have a print option available, but you can find this core rulebook for sale like online, just, a used, and you'll be fine if that's the kind of game that sort of, gets you going. So it's really good for players who love deep character, customization. So if you're that person that wants to scour through dozens of books of feats to find that perfect combination of feats to optimize your character with different class abilities and racial abilities and all that kind of stuff, this is your game right here. So you might think that 5e has that. This has it in spades and then some. It's this is really where, and it started with third edition, but it really hit its stride with 3.5 and then Pathfinder. This is really where you get that idea of like the Magic the Gathering approach to Dungeons and Dragons, which makes sense because Wizards was publishing Magic the Gathering before they made third edition. But this idea of like constantly putting out new content that players were going to want because it might be a little bit better than what you already have. So it's this, there is a little bit of power creep because every book that comes out has to do something just a little bit better than the book before, right? To entice you to take it because the player doesn't want to feel left behind. So they're going to buy all these books, right? So it's got extensive feat trees, tactical combat. So in 5e, combat modifiers are broken down to, do you have advantage or do you have disadvantage? And you can't have both. So you just kind of, say you've got 6 different things going on and 4 of them are positive and 2 of them are negative. Well, then the DM decides you have advantage and then you go from there. In this system, nope, you count all 6 of those things. And so you're constantly applying modifiers of bonuses. Like, well, you have that, you have cover and you have this and you blah, blah, blah. And it's like all that stuff. And then you're balancing. You can say, well, but you're also prone. So you have a negative to your armor class and like all these kinds of things. And so every round, those factors are changing and you're constantly going back and referring to what are the conditions that apply right now where I'm applying this long list of bonuses and penalties to my armor class. Combat in here takes forever every round. So I know it probably sounds like I'm being negative about it and I don't mean to. That's just not my style of game. But if this is your style of game, this is the system for you, right? If you like that layer of complexity and being able to figure out like, well, if I mix this, and this, then on the first round of combat, on my first attack, I'm going to, do all these different things. So I'm going to be like plus 46 to hit and I'm going to be able to do 300 points of damage. And like, if that's the kind of game you like, then this is the system for you. So a great starting adventure for this would be, it was actually written for the third edition, not 3.5, but the Sunless Citadel gets a lot of praise from folks. I remember that from my 3E days. So you can get the PDF on DriveThruRPG, and then I'm sure you could probably find a print copy used somewhere. And then for Pathfinder specifically, I think Crypt of the Everflame was written for the Pathfinder system, and that is a great starting adventure for Pathfinder 1E. Now, the reason I mention these two together is because when 3.5 shifted from being published and they moved to 4E, 4E was so different that it was completely non-compatible with 3.5. And there were a lot of people out there that just were not happy with that. And so Pathfinder came out, or Paizo came out with this game called Pathfinder that basically picked up the 3.5 rules, kind of made a few minor modifications, but they specifically wrote a system that was going to appeal to the millions of players who were playing 3.5 who did not want to shift to 4E. So a lot of people will call Pathfinder 1E. They'll refer to it as like D&D 3.75. I think that's even too aggressive. I think it's like maybe it's 3.55. I mean, there's a few changes in here. They add a lot of new stuff like new classes and things like that, but mechanically it's not really any different from 3.5. So I feel like you can use them interchangeably. So again, you've got discords here for advanced D&D and OSR where you can talk about like original D&D, first edition, I should say. There are forums on like, say, Dragon's Foot. So that is your pain point number 2. So let's move on to pain point number 3. This one can appeal to people who maybe just they're not looking to get into OSR, or maybe they are, but that very specific style. And this is a group who maybe they want their games to be more story driven. They want more narrative gameplay. Okay, so I know some old timers don't like that. That's fine, but a lot of people do, and I think it's cool. So there's a place for these gamers, even within the OSR kind of genre. Okay, so I think the first game that comes to mind for me with that style of play that is still OSR adjacent would be Dungeon World. It's one of the Powered by the Apocalypse games. And I would say it's sort of a narrative / OSR hybrid. It's the best way to describe it. So in that system, I mean, the kind of the core of that system is instead of success or failure in that system in Dungeon World, it's something happens or something else happens. Those are kind of like your two things. So there's no, as an example, there's no hit roll, that kind of thing. If you want to attack a goblin and try to, maybe you want to attack it and kill it for whatever reason. So you just say that that's what you're going to do. And then whether that happens is sort of based on like what else is happening at the time. Is the goblin armed? Are there other goblins around? Like, and so the referee is constantly adjusting to what the players are saying. And so it's very story based. Does that action serve the story that's being told in this thing? So it's very narrative in nature. So I think a first adventure for this one would be the Perilous Wilds supplement, which is be a good one. And Dungeon World's really going to be great for groups who want sort of that emergent storytelling, but they want to keep some of those OSR sensibilities. So it's class and level, it's got the 6 ability scores, like that kind of stuff that you're used to from like a Dungeons and Dragons game. Now, getting a little bit further away from that, I would say it's still within the OSR realm, although mechanically it starts to be a little bit different, but a game like Worlds Without Number. So there's a free edition available that you can get online very easily. It's like the no art edition and things like that. The actual book looks really cool. I just don't have it. It's a little pricey for me right now, but I do have the free version. And this is a game that it relies on a lot of like random tables to like help kind of build out what's going on in the world. And I dig that kind of stuff. You guys know I mention all the time, I love random tables like that for inspiration. Even if I don't roll, I can just look at a thing and say that, oh, I'm going to use that idea. And so that's something that I really appreciate. Worlds Without Number, I think, is going to be best for people who want like those sandbox style of games. Okay, so sandbox meaning you're not on a linear path. It's not prescripted. It's like the referee is constantly adjusting and being flexible to what the players say that they're doing, and then creating the situation from their actions and what they do, as opposed to telling them, this is what's happening. You're going on this quest to do the thing. The players say where they're going, and then the DM, the referee, has a map and knows kind of like what's in each area, and then expands on that as the players get into it. So it's got faction play and it's got procedural world building. So it's getting, it still has a lot of basis in OSR, but it's that more narrative style of play. Now, the next one is, I'd say, more of a setting, but it is kind of a game. It's Dolmenwood. This is being written for the Old School Essentials game system, but making some changes. And it's narrative friendly, I'll put it that way. So it's got this kind of like dark fairy tale mythology aesthetic to it, but it is because it's these rules like game system of that's based in the mechanics of 1981 BXD&D. It is a lot more flexible and open for player ingenuity and coming up with ideas that a dungeon master or the referee in this case would adapt to, involving again like fairy tales and deep lore within that particular setting. So I wouldn't call it a story-based game, but it has that kind of sensibility to it while retaining the core of what makes it an OSR style game. So that's definitely something that I would check out. It's not out yet, is my understanding. I know that they did a Kickstarter a while ago, but I don't believe the books have begun shipping yet. So, but you can keep an eye on it. Eventually I think you'll be able to just buy it if you didn't participate in the Kickstarter. So, there's Reddits for Dungeon World. There's Reddits for Powered by the Apocalypse. There's forums. Actually, the Alexandrian RPG is a great place to discuss things like that. And then, Discord, there's a whole server on Discord just for Worlds Without Number. If you're into using Discord, Discord's another thing that I just don't get. Not really clear on how to navigate that one yet. So, those are your first three, I think, pain points. So, and as a reminder, as I'm going through these, mention in the comments below, like, are those things that you were looking at that are, causing you to kind of want to leave 5e? And then conversely, if you're someone who's really well versed in these, maybe you have another suggestion of a game. And I understood this was not intended to be exhaustive, and these are not even going to be the best examples of games that can fit these specific frustrations and help people get past them. It's just kind of like the ones that came top of mind, some of them that I actually own and have played before. And but please share those below and make sure that we're keeping the discussion going to help people find the exact game that's going to work for them. But before we continue, I do want to ask that if you are interested in supporting the channel, and that's something that you want to do, the three best ways that you can do that right now would be, well, one, to subscribe. Make sure that you're subscribed. So that's key, and that's something easy and takes a second and it's free. So other things that you can do would be to become a super fan and hit the little heart icon with the $sign. And if you want to contribute, that's a great way to kind of help keep the channel going, help me upgrade equipment. So I'm using some of my upgraded equipment as we speak now, microphone, and actually, I was able to get a printer, which, as you know, I didn't have a printer for like the first 2 years of doing this because my printer broke and I just did get a new one. But I have acquired a printer, which means now I can make, like, my notes are not in my little hand scribble. They're actually printed out, and that's easier to see. It's not a script, but it's like bullet points for me to refer to. And it makes it easier for me because a lot of times I was like squinting and trying to read my notes because my handwriting is just horrific and it gets worse as I get older. And I'm using like a new contraption to shoot the videos. So that's all coming from like SUPERFAN contributions. Okay, the other thing you can do is visit my shop to buy a t-shirt, hoodie, mug, poster, notebook, or other item featuring exclusive tabletop role-playing game designs, as well as other designs that you can only find at my shop. So I mentioned I have a new design recently. It's the 7 classic classes. I think it's a cool shirt, and maybe you will too, or you'll find another one while you're visiting the shop. And then, of course, lastly, if you are interested in especially this version of the game, Old School Essentials, or the 1981 BX version of the game, then you can pick up my supplement, Alchemy, Explosives, and Inventions. It's available for sale on DriveThruRPG and PDF and print, soft cover, print on demand, and either a parchment colored background or a plain white background, whichever one you find it easier to read. So it's a complete guide for playing expert type characters in fantasy role-playing games. And it has, tons of random tables, which again, as you know, I love. So I love these tables here that talk about like the different equipment or things that are related to all the different class concepts that I came up with. And a lot of them are mix and match tables. I've got siege equipment and things like that. But there's also like a guild hall. There's 3 new classes, equipment, advice for running campaigns, all that in 44 pages. It's illustrated, and it's available for sale right now at DriveThruRPG. All right, let's keep moving along and go to pain point number 4. Maybe you want a darker or just a more thematic experience. Maybe you don't like the art that comes in 5th edition and you're looking for something that is a little bit more unique or has a different style? Well, we've got some games for you then. So, in terms of art and also just in terms of presentation, I think this one, now again, my understanding is that this is pronounced Mjörkborg, but it looks like Morkborg. Okay. But I mean, you could just tell right off the gate, like this, just the aesthetics of this. Every page has a different kind of layout, different fonts, different things and like on purpose, they're having fun with it. So I love an example like this, the like what weapon does what kind of damage. Okay. Like is this little guy with all these like things coming out of him. Uh it's just it's really fun. So it is definitely not a traditional OSR game. I would call it OSR adjacent. Some people call it new SR, new school role playing or new school renaissance. It definitely falls within sort of a subgenre called art punk, I think. But this is a great way to get like this has a very, very specific aesthetic to it that is completely different from 5e. Okay, so that's Mjörkborg. Now, you can get the SRD for this one, I believe, for free. And then the first adventure, I think, is in the core book here, if memory serves. And there's not a great table of contents in this, but it's the Wrought Black Sludge. So, yep, here it is. The Shadow King's Lost Heir. So that's your starting adventure. It's right here in the core book. All right. And then this is really good for players who love that kind of grim, dark art. They love the heavy metal aesthetics and they want brutal, fast play. That's Mjörkborg. Okay. So other games that would fit in this genre would be the Deathbringer game from Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeon Craft. So I used an early beta version of that game for a 50th anniversary, 50th birthday game one shot that I ran for my friend last year, and it worked great. Now I made my own modifications to it, but it is a great game. There's actually even just a one-page version available that like he did it where you can trifold it and make it like this. It's a cool thing. You can get that on Drive-Thru RPG, but it is a simple, brutal OSR style game. It's class and level. It's got the regular attributes, but you don't ever look. You generate your attributes like on a 3 to 18, but once you do that, you just note like what your bonus or penalty is, and then you never look at the original score again. So the first adventure that you'd use is, I think any OSR adventure with kind of a lethal tone is going to work. So I don't believe that there have been any official published adventures for Deathbringer yet. And he is working on sort of a bigger expanded version of the game that I think he's going to kickstart later this year. I'm not sure if he'll get there yet, but I know he was working on that. But again, you kind of have these earlier versions. You can get a more detailed version of the game if you join his Patreon. And I would say it's best for people if you like deadly combat, you like simple mechanics, and just kind of like a rules light experience. So it is very much designed in such a way of like, just, say what you want to do, roll the dice, and then move on. There's not a lot of like looking things up at the table and getting into rules arguments. So it's just a clean system. All right. So some more thematically, type systems that really have a unique style to them. I think Hyperborea. So it was originally Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, but they have shortened the name to just Hyperborea. And it's really kind of, I would say it is based on first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but making it a little bit more presentable, easy to use, easy to understand, and it presenting from the layout. And then also it has that aesthetic of, it's like the Robert E. Howard, like Conan books. That's the Hyperborea. So it's very much based in like a hardcore sword and sorcery pulp fantasy world, not like the vanilla fantasy where, you've got dragon people and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't have that, right? So it's mostly the players are humans. They used to have in earlier editions, there were other things like you could be like a white ape, for example, things like that. But I think it's kind of gone the way of like making all of the characters more human. So they have some really great adventures for this game. So the mystery at Port Greeley gets a lot of love, but it's for higher level. It's like fourth through sixth. So if you're looking for an entry level, I think that Late Trapper's Lament might be a good choice. You can find all these on the website, and again, I will put links down below. By the way, none of these links are affiliate links. These folks have no idea that I'm even making this video, so feel free to shop with an ease of conscience, I guess. But it's really good for players who love that kind of pulp fantasy and that Conan style sword and sorcery aesthetic. So that is Hyperborea. So another thing I meant to point out with regard to first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is that you can get another retro clone. This is the Old School Reference and Index compilation, or OSRIC, and this is a kind of one book version of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons written with the open game license. It does make some changes, but it is pretty close to the original version of the game. So this is another option for you if you can't find, or you find that the first edition, the original ones, are too expensive. And again, you just want a single volume book that you can use. There's a bunch of different versions of this. There's PDFs, but there's soft cover like this one. There's hardcover, all that kind of stuff. And my understanding is there is going to be a Kickstarter for a revised edition of this book. I believe it's on its third edition coming up, so later this year. And, my thinking would be when that comes out, by that point, you will have, it will be able to draw upon all the advancements that have been made lately in terms of layout and design and things like that to make this even easier to use. Because this is pretty, you can see, wall of text heavy. And I'm hoping that the revised edition will kind of get away from that a little bit and kind of rely on some, like I said, some modern layout and design parameters. So that's something that you can do if you want to play first edition. But again, you're looking for something that's going to be a little bit easier to acquire in terms of the cost and ease of use. Okay. Okay, so now let's move on to the pain point number 5. And this one is maybe not really a pain point, but it is indicative of someone who's just kind of getting tired of a certain type of game in 5e, which is maybe they want a different genre, but they want to keep within that sort of realm of, D&D adjacent mechanics, but just not that genre of game. So there's a few different options here. Most of them are going to move a little bit far away from Dungeons and Dragons, but there's an example. There's Stars Without Number. So earlier I mentioned Worlds Without Number. Well, the game that came first was actually called Stars Without Number, and it is a science fiction game. So very, very similar in concept. Again, a free version is available online if you were looking for that. There is an adventure for starting players called Hard Light, but it is best for, I would say, science fiction OSR fans who want deep world building and faction play. So that's what these games are really big, like Worlds Without Number, Stars Without Number, really big on like factions, and then using these random tables to help create your world as you go along, rather than having an idea of the world. You create it as you go with these random tables. So that's an option. Again, mechanically, doesn't share a lot in common with Dungeons and Dragons, but it's something that you can easily pick up and understand if you've played role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons in the past. So there's also a game now. I'm going to call this one Pirate Borg, which is an offshoot of Myrkborg, but it is obviously a pirate. It's a pirate-inspired new school Renaissance, or I guess if you want to call it OSR adjacent style game based on the rules engine from Myrkborg. It has some first adventures. The Dark Caribbean has like a sandbox campaign for this. That's a great campaign to use starting out and then kind of like carrying you through. And it's best for players who are looking for, like, say, maritime adventures. So getting away from that standard sort of, quote unquote vanilla fantasy, or that really high fantasy, the Forgotten Realms stuff that's like baked into 5e. You can move away from that with something like this. It's dark fantasy. And again, it's got that kind of like brutal OSR mechanics and combat. Now, not every OSR style game has brutal combat, but Myrkborg definitely does. All right. Now, if you want something even more out there, more different. So I think 2 great examples would be Ultraviolet Grasslands. So you would want to check out Ultraviolet Grasslands and the Black City. It's sort of like psychedelic fantasy meets like a road trip D&D adventure is the best way I could think of to describe it, but it is very far out there. So the first adventure, the Violet City, I think is like a starting location that's in the core book. It's a great place to start. And I would say it's for players who really want sort of like it's kind of heavy metal. I think psychedelic is a better word. But like an open world style OSR game that has exploration and discovery kind of built into the mechanics of how the game system works. So you could also check out something like Electric Bastion Land. So the core game is just called Electric Bastion Land, and it is sort of based on another game called Into the Odd, but it is urban fantasy. It's got 3 stats, not 6. It does not have hit rolls. So if you attack somebody, you hit automatically, and then you figure out what kind of damage is done based on like what's happening in the game. It uses saves, not skills. And it relies on player ingenuity, which is a hallmark of old school Renaissance design. So that's why I'm kind of including it in here. So I definitely think that this is something to check out if you're looking to get like way far out there in terms of like the aesthetics, the environment, the setting that you're using with a game like this. So I think it's really more designed for you to kind of create your own adventures to run them on the fly based on like what you're looking to do in the game. So one of the things that happens in this game when you create a character is that they have a background that's relatively detailed. And one of the things in the background is going to be that you had a failed career before you started adventuring. And so one of the things that's kind of fun to do as a starting adventure is write it based around that failed career, like what happened, and then you can kind of take off from there. So that's what I'm saying. It kind of makes more sense to sort of create it on your own, because then you can tailor it to your play groups and what their starting characters are like, rather than trying to shoehorn into something that was written for somebody else. Okay, so definitely it's great for if you're a fan of like kind of that surreal city exploration, fast-paced rules. It's very quick and easy, and very, very player-driven stories. So you can see some of these started kind of like overlap in terms of like where would you slot this in. So you could have put this into like that narrative story building type of thing that we were talking about earlier. I just put it here because I think the setting kind of deserved to be called out in its own section. Okay, so those are some of the different games that I think that could have fit in here. Again, it's not exhaustive. These are just examples. So some examples, like there's Reddits for Stars Without Number. There's a Reddit for Pirate Borg. There's Discords for Sinominy Publishing, who are the people who publish Stars Without Number, also Worlds Without Number. So you can go to their Discord to find out more. And, you can go to forums on like RPG Net. There's a lot of like still active forums out there for a lot of different role-playing games. You can find a forum or a thread dedicated to that if you're more of a forum type of person. Now, pain point number 6, I think is going to resonate with a lot of folks right now, whether you're an old-time gamer or maybe you're a relatively new gamer. But one of the things that a lot of people don't like about 5e is that it is published by a relatively giant corporation in Hasbro. So maybe you're looking to move to another game because you just don't want to support Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro for whatever reasons. I'm not going to get into what those reasons are. You can make up your own reasons. I'm going to look at it from the standpoint that they're big corporations and maybe we want to support the little guy. So some players prefer to support independent publishers, and I'm one of those people. So, I'm also trying to publish my own stuff. So I get how difficult that is. And people put a lot of, time, sweat, tears, blood into making these products. And I think it, helps to acknowledge them and throw a little support that their way. Okay. So now pretty much all the games that I'm talking about here, with the exception of like the old out of print stuff, are independent publishers. I mean, even Paizo, it's a company. I mean, they have employees and stuff like that, but it is a small fraction of how big Wizards of the Coast is. And then Wizards of the Coast is just a part of the overall giant part of Hasbro, right? So most of these games, Mirkbori and Old School Essentials and all those, can be considered part of of these independent publishers. However, to kind of expand on that, I'm just going to do a few more. So I'm going to highlight 3 here. And we're going to kind of go from closest related to Dungeons & Dragons to farthest. Okay, so I'd say closest as far as a small publisher, this would be Trollord Games' Castles and Crusades. So I just did a whole video on this game system. I'll put a link to it up here, but you can see more about the game in that video. But essentially, this is this is the player's handbook for the system. It's got the 3 core books that you'd be used to. Castle Keeper's Guide is their version of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and then it has a monster manual. So this is for people who want an advanced D&D, like first edition feel, but they want unified mechanics and easier rules that they're used to from like things starting from 3rd edition on. So this is like, I always kind of equate it to, and it doesn't really do justice to the system, but it's sort of like a very stripped down 3rd edition that removes like feats and skills and all that kind of stuff, but keeps things like D20 roll high, ascending armor class. It has, the standard classes and races from 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons. So it's got like assassins and illusionists and stuff like that. It has different experience points tables for different classes. So that harkens back to the original, 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons. But most of the mechanics in here are going to be something that you're a little bit more familiar with in terms of like how you're going to resolve situations. Okay, so see my more detailed video if this is something that appeals to you. I will say that Gary Gygax, before he passed away, was designing content for this version of the game. He worked with the Trollords folks, and he said it's been repeated that Gary said that this is the version of D&D that he would have ended up creating had he been staying at TSR. So take or leave that I've heard that repeated so many times. So I think they do have a lot of different starting adventures. Assault on Blacktooth Ridge is probably a good place to start if you're looking for something specifically designed for Castles and Crusades. You can get a lot of the rules as PDFs. You can get them as, again, hardcovers, and just go to the Trollords website. And again, there'll be links down below so you can learn more about the game. Now, that's Castles and Crusades. Another game, this is going to get a little bit farther, but still kind of in that OSR realm, is going to be not this game. This is Solar Blades and Cosmic Spells, but this is a science fiction version of a game called Sharp Swords and Sinister Spells. And it is that's the fantasy version of this. I only have this version, but it has, you choose archetypes, you have different races and kind of like backgrounds, but it's very table based. So again, a lot of what you're going to do in this game is design your character and design your world based on rolling on these different tables. And I like that kind of stuff because the story comes out emerging from rolling on these tables rather than necessarily doing all the work ahead of time. And I, as a DM, I love that kind of stuff. I love being inspired by tables like this. So it is, again, I would say maybe it falls within that new SR style of game. This is by Diogo Nogueira, and I believe he's Brazilian, and there's a very big role-playing game community in Brazil, specifically, very specifically also in the OSR kind of realm. So that's kind of cool. And he's just a guy. He's just like a single guy, but he puts out books like this that are very well done, have great art, and great layout. And, if you want to support an independent guy, that is a perfect example. So it's rules light, it's OSR inspired sword and sorcery. You could easily run Tomb of the Serpent Kings with Sharp Swords and Sinister Spells, even though it wasn't designed for that. But it's a very popular adventure within the OSR community. And I think it's best for players who want sort of a lightweight, narrative-driven kind of OSR style game or OSR inspired game, but a strong pulp fantasy feel, not as strong as say Hyperborea, but it's, it's in that realm. And they prefer to support independent publishers over, a large corporation. All right. And then last up in this category, I'm going to talk about Savage Worlds, partly because I've done a whole review for this game before here on the channel. It's one of my very earliest videos. So if you do go back and watch that, just know that was maybe my second or third video that I ever made before I kind of had this whole system down of and I'm still learning as we go along. Obviously, I'm not a professional YouTube creator by any means, but Savage Worlds, I would start with this one. This is the Adventure Edition. They have different versions of the game. And I think that this is great for people who like kind of like that pulpy action. Fast, furious fun is the mantra of Savage Worlds, and the game does play that way. It goes very, very quickly. Combat can be resolved pretty quickly. It uses a lot of fun, different things like drawing. You draw cards for your initiative instead of rolling dice, and it changes every round. And if you draw a joker, something fun happens. And then once you draw that, then you bring in all the cards that have been used so far and you reshuffle them. Until you draw a joker, you're just doling out the deck each time. So it just has some kind of really fun things, but it does have sort of like the mechanics are very, very adaptable to whatever kind of genre that you want to run. So it does work well with like pulpy fantasy. I think you'd have a little trouble running like high fantasy. Not that you'd have trouble. It's just, it's not designed for that. If you want to run high fantasy, just play Dungeons and Dragons. But if you want to do some weird fantasy kind of thing with like weird tech, or again, like pulp style, a bunch of different things, then definitely you could use Savage Worlds for that. Very fast gameplay. They have a variety of different settings. So Savage Worlds is more about the settings than it is about adventures. So Deadlands is a setting, for example, which I've played before. I've played Cthulhu with Savage Worlds. I've played Delta Green with Savage Worlds. I've played Star Trek. I've played Warhammer 40K. And they also do have a Pathfinder version. So they teamed up with the folks at Paizo to make a Pathfinder fantasy-inspired game for Savage Worlds. And I have a video for that here as well on the channel that you can check out. So all of those are small. I mean, this is a company, you know, Pinnacle Entertainment is a company, but tiny. I would still call them independent. Okay. So that's kind of like that sixth sort of pain point. And again, there's Reddits for Savage Worlds, there's Reddits for OSR. So the OSR Reddit is very big and it encompasses a lot of stuff, but you can find a lot of great content in there. Savage Worlds used to have their own forums on Pinnacle Entertainment Group, but they closed down a few years ago. I'm not really clear why they closed down, and they don't have a Discord or anything like that. So forum wise, I think you're going to be stuck back on RPG Net. I don't mean stuck in a bad way. It's just like there's limited options if you're a forum person, I'd say with games these days, to kind of like find the right kind of place for that. And then Discord, I couldn't really find any Discords that were dedicated to any of these three games that we're talking about. So if you know of one, drop it in the comments below and let me know. So again, there are a lot of these different rule systems that are available for free online, whether it's like their SRDs or they're giving away free PDFs or art-free PDFs, whatever like that. So a great way to learn about the games without any kind of cash outlay at all. So you could kind of make sure that it's the style of game that appeals to what it is that you're trying to address, that you're frustrated with 5e about. So definitely check those out. And again, I'm asking for the community here to share those in the comments below, your examples in different games, to try to help folks, you know, find the system that fits the style of game that they want to play. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up, offer some closing thoughts here. And, you know, really, I just want to encourage you all to try a different system. If 5e is not working for you, don't give up on role playing. Try something else, and don't be discouraged by hearing stories and, you know, like, oh, this group of people's terrible, these games are too complicated and all that kind of stuff. Find out on your own, and you'll find plenty of good people out there who want to help you, who want to listen to what you have to say and help you find the style of game that you want to play. And you know, if they're not all complicated, some of them can be, and a lot of times that's a benefit. That's something that you'd be looking for. But if you don't want that layer of complication, there's a ton of other games out there that aren't like that. So, you know, take the time, do the research that you need to do to find the kind of game that fits in with you, and ask for help. Ask people in the comments here. You know, I get comments all the time from former TSR employees even, who add additional color and background and context to things that I'm talking about. That's a great opportunity to interact with a professional game designer, whether they're still active or not, doesn't matter. They had a career doing that, and ask them like, hey, I'm kind of curious about this, and this, like, what would you suggest? And you'll get like, you know, a former game designer, or it could even be current, who mentions that. So again, there's tons of forums and communities and Facebook groups. And I mentioned Facebook group once, and someone was like, "Wow, you really are old," which I thought was funny. But yeah, there's a lot of places out there where you can find information to kind of get the what you're looking for. So I have reviews here on the channel all the time. I do reviews of independent tabletop role-playing games. I mostly do supplements for OSR, things that I can adapt to the game and run for my daughter. But, you know, systems from time to time. Again, I've covered Savage Worlds. I wouldn't call that OSR, but I've covered it. You know, Castles and Crusades, things like that. And then I do have that other video that is much more in depth on, you know, a bunch of different OSR style games. So you'll find all of that in that other video there. And, you know, just looking for you to share your own recommendations in the comments. And so make sure and do that below. And then also while you're down there, you'll find places where you can join me on social media. So I'm trying to be more active on Blue Sky, but, you know, I'm still on the legacy stuff, Instagram and Facebook, that kind of stuff. And you will find places, again, where we've mentioned before, where you can visit my blog to find content that I create from time to time. So my most recent one is I did like a whole mini setting that is, it's pretty rules light or rules neutral. I say rules neutral. It's more setting stuff that you can use. And it's a whole setting that's on my blog for free that you can check out. And even if you don't use it as is, I'm sure you'll find ideas in there to inspire other things that you're doing in your game. So it's another great place where you can go to kind of connect with me. And I also already mentioned ways that you can support the channel. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. And I hope that you enjoyed this video, that you learned something, and again, that you're able to share your thoughts in the comments with the other community members here to kind of help people. And definitely reach out to me and ask me questions. You know, say like, hey, I've heard this, like, is this game really like this or is it not, or whatever it is. And like I said, if I can't answer it myself, I will do my best to find someone who can help you out. So make sure that you take advantage of that. And once again, thank you very, very much for watching. Stay safe, happy gaming, and I will talk to you next time. And now for the bonus content, what I was drinking, what I was listening to when I made my notes for this video. There's also going to be an extra to the bonus content this time, and I'll talk about that in a second. So first, let me just deal with the drinking part. So this is yet another bottle that my dad had in his apartment. Didn't have a ton of it left, as you see here. This is from Green Bar Distillery. Now, I went to Green Bar with my dad a few years ago. Well, it was pre-pandemic, so it's been more than a few years, but it was a Father's Day gift for him. I took him to an Amaro making class, and he and I made our own homemade Amaro. And I guess my dad must have finished his because I couldn't find it anywhere. I still have some of mine left, but that was our Green Bar in LA, which is, they call it the oldest distillery, like currently operating distillery in Los Angeles that was, you know, founded post prohibition. So it didn't open until like sometime in the 2000s. It's not old by any means, but it's the oldest one still currently in operation. But you know, we visited their shop that was there, and I bought a bottle of Grand Hops Amaro, which I have featured on the channel here before, but my dad bought this one. So this is amber gin, and essentially what this is, it's an aged gin based on their. They have a gin that they make. Their core gin is, I want to say it's called Bright Gin or something like that. It's supposed to evoke the flavors of Los Angeles, and this is essentially an aged version of that gin. So this is says it's the ancestor of all modern gins. It combines 14-hole botanicals and lost techniques from the Renaissance for complex layered flavors and natural color. This gin reaches back to the past and creates something new. Add depth to market fresh, produce-driven cocktails, or new dimensions to gin classics like Negronis or Gin Fizz. So I did have a Negroni with this with my dad once, and it works. I also tried it once in a martini, and I didn't like that. I feel that this is much better as a blending cocktail ingredient, not as a main ingredient. So with the martini, at least the way I like to drink martinis, this didn't really do it. So they suggest doing it with an East Side, which is a cocktail. I first had my favorite bartender here first introduced me to the East Side like a few years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I haven't tried it with amber gin, so I'm guessing, they suggest that would work, but it's got juniper and lavender and lemon zest and all the things that you would expect from a gin. Now, normally, again, I wouldn't drink gin. I mean, it's not warm; it's room temp. But normally, I would chill it. Sorry for knocking that glass down. But when I'm tasting things, sometimes you can get better taste when it's not so cold that you can't taste it. So obviously, you see the color here, and it's interesting. That's got a lot of cinnamon. Oddly enough, I mean, cinnamon is a bittering agent, but you get the juniper, but it's a little hidden. There's also like some vanilla, maybe, which quite honestly is not something I would look for in a gin. Uh, hmm. Yeah, very, very cinnamon forward. You get those kind of vanilla toffee notes a little bit, very reminiscent of like a whiskey, those flavors that you get picked up from being in the barrel. Um, I think for me, the thing is, I like the flavor of gin. I like that sharp juniper flavor, and I usually miss it when I can't taste it. And this is really doing everything it can to kind of cover that up with all these other flavors. So I've heard people say like this is a gin for people who like to drink whiskey. I guess I can see that. So I don't know. I mean, definitely give it a try. Now, I don't see it listed on their website. I went to the website for Green Bar, and they don't have this listed currently. But I saw places selling it online with a wild different in prices. I found one place selling it for $25, and I found another place selling it for between 60 and 100. So I'm not really sure what that's about, but um, I would give that a look if you can find it. And just try it out. You might as well. Life's too short to not try new things. So cheers, and again, thanks for everything, for watching. Okay, so this is a fun thing. Um, Deal with the record first, but it's kind of part of a bigger story. So if you remember, one of the first times that I did the bonus content, I featured this record by a jazz guitarist named Wes Montgomery. He's one of my favorites. I love the music. I love his style of playing. He's a very, very detailed, accomplished guitar player. Died way too young. But I talked about a record that I got here in Los Angeles at Amoeba Records in Hollywood for Record Store Day. It was called Smokin' in Seattle. And it was a live concert performance at a club up in Seattle from the 1960s called the Penthouse. And I was standing in line, and this guy in line behind me asked, like, hey, what do you guys hear? Because you're in line forever, right? We were in line for probably 4 hours trying to turn our list in and get our records. And this guy said, "Oh, what do you guys here to get?" And I was like, "Well, I have a lot on my list, but like the one I want to make sure that I get, like I'll be happy if I get this one, and nothing else, is this double album Smokin' in Seattle. It's a live concert." And I'm explaining what the record is to him, and I go through the whole thing. I was like, because I'm a jazz guy, blah blah blah. And he's roughly my age, and he was like, that's my record. And I was like, "Oh, you want to get it too?" And he's like, "No, like that's my record. Like I was responsible for putting that record out." And I come to find out his name's Charlie Puzo, and he is the son of the guy who used to own the Penthouse, also named Charlie Puzo, up in Seattle. And it was like the first modern jazz club in the Seattle area. Sadly, it was only there from basically the 60s, 62 to 68, I think. And in 68, it closed down and the building was demolished. But during that time, they hosted so many popular jazz artists, including probably most famously, people would say like John Coltrane did a concert up there in 1965. And that has been released now live in Seattle. And if memory serves, it's him doing "A Love Supreme," that album, and I've talked about that album here before, but performing it live in Seattle. And it's a great record, which I do own. And so Charlie, this guy in line, was just talking, and he was saying that, like, his dad had owned, that club. And so they have access to all these tapes, and they're like little by little starting to realize that, like, they have access to, they can put them out, they can get them remastered and cut onto vinyl and publish the stuff that's just been sitting there for years that's never had a release that you could buy. And so, and one of the first ones they did was that Wes Montgomery Smoking in Seattle. And so I thought, like, how cool that I'm standing in line by the guy who was responsible for putting the record. Well, flash forward to a few years after that. So probably say maybe 3 or 4 years after that, I got a follower on my Twitter account for Daddy Roll the One. And back then I had so few Twitter followers. I was at like 200 total versus now I'm a little over 3,000. But I got a follower. And back then, because I had so few followers, like, I paid extra special attention to everybody that followed me. And I just can't, unfortunately, do that anymore. I'm sorry. But I saw that this person followed me. And what I used to do is, like, look at their profile, wanted to decide if I was going to follow them back, but, to kind of see who they were. And I saw this guy, and I didn't remember the name, but I saw he said he was into D&D and jazz. And I was like, D&D and jazz, like, that's my guy. Like, this is going to be awesome. And then as I looked up his profile and I was like, holy cow, that's the guy that I was standing in line with at Amoeba. And so I mentioned it to him, but I don't really think we had a lot of interaction on Twitter other than he just followed me. He's not much of a Twitter user, but I just always kind of had that in the back of my head. So then my best friend, who was also in line with me that time when we met, Charlie, was opened a record store in Burbank. And he told me after the record store opened, he's like, you'll never guess who came in. It's that guy who did the record label with the Penthouse shows from the Seattle Penthouse. And he had talked to him about, like, record store day releases and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, how cool. Like, does he remember talking to us online? And he's like, yeah, whatever. So I know this is a long backstory, but it's all related. Okay. So a few weeks ago, I mentioned in a community chat, community post here on YouTube that I had, hit my 1 million viewer mark. And I saw a guy named Charlie Puzo, like, give, like, the clapping emoji, like, that's awesome, like, or praise or like whatever. And so I just commented back and said, hey, I know I've told you this story before, but it's been like 7 years or 8 years since I mentioned it. But, like, I don't know if you remember, but, like, I was that guy talking online. And he's like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Like, he's like, and he is a big D&D player. And he's like, hey, if you're going to be around, I'd love to meet up. Well, he came by my friend's shop yesterday on Sunday, and I was working there, and he brought me this record along with a couple others, which I will feature in future videos. So he brought this. This is Jazz from the Pacific Northwest by Shelly Manne and His Men. Kind of a goofy band name, but Shelly Manne was a very, very popular jazz drummer on the West Coast. So he was one of the kind of like there's East Coast and West Coast rap, especially during like the 60s. There was this big kind of difference between West Coast jazz and East Coast jazz. And West Coast jazz became eventually related to what they called cool jazz, which a lot of people like Dave Brubeck and Chet Baker and those kind of guys were in that kind of like that West Coast jazz style. And then you had the other guys like Miles Davis in New York and people like that. And that was like the kind of the East Coast jazz. But anyway, this record came out. Now, this is a record store day release from last year to 2024, which I unfortunately didn't pick up just because I was getting so much stuff. I had to cut my list somewhere. This was on my list. And at the last minute, I cut it off. But if you see here, so it's a double album. So the first album, side A and B, is a concert recorded at the Monterey Jazz Festival in 1958. And then the second album, side C and D, was recorded at the Penthouse in Seattle, Washington in September of 1966. And so and if you see associate producers, there's Charlie Puzo's name on here. So he was involved with putting this record out, which is why he had it. And he just gave it to me. It's like, he said he really enjoys the channel. And so he was at my friend's shop for a while. I had a very nice, awesome discussion about his involvement with Dungeons and Dragons and how he played as a kid, and then he got involved back, and now he plays like in a Zoom campaign or online campaign like every week with folks, and it sounded like a really, really cool campaign. He's friends with a very prolific voice actor, who does voiceovers for different types of productions, and that guy plays in these games with Charlie, and so he's met other people because of him, and they get online every week and play D&D, and I just thought, like, how cool was that? And he was saying that He really enjoys my channel, and and I think he kind of found it independently, like just kind of stumbled across it. And he was mentioning like it's some of the videos that he likes. He really enjoys my campaign updates that I do for the game that I run for my daughter and her friends, which made me feel good because I love doing those videos, even though they don't get as many views as like saying that the history videos. But we just had a really awesome discussion about D&D and about music, and for Record Store Day this year, which is going to be on April 12th of 2025. If you want to check out one of his releases, he is re-releasing that Smokin' in Seattle record that's been out of print, the one that I picked up back in, I think it was like 2016, 2017, something like that. They're re-releasing again, and they did some tweaks to the mastering to kind of really get closer to that kind of live performance sound, where he said it really kind of feels like you're in the room. And they were doing that deliberately. They've got the master tapes, but a lot of times it's not just the recording, it's the engineering and the mastering that goes into really making the sound pop the way that it was originally intended to. And so they are re-releasing that record, which is really cool. So you can go out and get that Record Store Day this year on April 12th of 2025 if you have a record store located near you. If you're in the Southern California area, I would highly recommend you check out my friend's shop, Run Out Groove Records in Burbank, in the Magnolia Park section of Burbank. But anyway, this record is really great. And I love that I have it now because, I was sad when I didn't pick it up last year. Shelly Mann is on drums. But then if you see this name here, Monty Budwig on bass, and he's on the 58 set as well as at the 66 set up in Seattle. So Monty Budwig, maybe that name sounds familiar to you if you're a jazz nerd like I am, but he played with Vince Guaraldi on some of the original like Charlie Brown records that were recorded, like the music from the TV specials and that were done back in the 60s. So that was the name that popped out to me and jumped. But these guys are all very accomplished jazz musicians. So he's the only one that carries over from both sets, other than Shelly Mann, of course. But it's a great record. It sounds awesome. It sounds so good. And then you get, it's this nice gatefold package, and you have like the nice booklet here. They always do really good packaging. So, all these great liner notes, and like that's the logo for the Penthouse Club up in Seattle, which, like I said, unfortunately is not there anymore. So anyway, they have a whole release of records. You can check out Charlie's Penthouse Records shop. I'll put a link to it in the show notes where you can find releases. They've been doing a lot of stuff with pianist Ahmad Jamal. They're called like the Emerald Knights series. I have all of them. I love Ahmad Jamal as a piano player. And again, all live recordings from that club back in the day. So now, one of the other things that Charlie brought me, he brought me a t-shirt, which is very nice. I'm actually wearing it right now. You just can't see it on the camera. But he brought me this magazine, fantastic, the Magazine of Imaginative Media. This one is dedicated to Star Wars. This is Empire Strikes Back, when Empire Strikes Back came out in 1980. And the reason that he picked this was because if you see up here, it says Dungeons and Dragons products catalog, see page 55. And I thought like, oh, that's awesome. And so that's exactly why he picked this, because he thought it would be something that I would be interested in. And I thought I would just show you guys. So, I know it's not an album or a drink, but I think it's a fun thing for you guys to see. So this is the catalog printed in this magazine. And it's not an official TSR catalog, even though their logos here and some of their stuff is, but if you can just see from looking at this picture here, these are not all TSR releases. And so right away, you see there's some Elric stuff here from Chaosium, like the Stormbringer stuff. And they've got Judges Guild stuff, approved for use with Traveler. So this is not just Dungeons and Dragons, it's also role-playing games in general. So you've got the Holmes Basics set here. It's really hard to see. The reproduction in this is not great from this catalog, but that is the D series of adventures, and those are the old monochrome ones, D1, 2, and 3, the Drow series. And then that's the Player's Handbook, the Advanced D&D Player's Handbook with the Trampier cover. But that's the World of Greyhawk Folio. And then you have, this says the G&D series, but of course they've already covered the D series up there. And then you've got Judges Guild Adventures even, and then Ralph Partha Miniatures. And then you just have a list of all these different things that you can get. So here's your D&D stuff, but there's also, again, Chaosium, Games Designers Workshop, Traveler, Rune Quest. There's an ad. Judges Guild again. Judges Guild gets a whole section here all stuff that's compatible with advanced D&D. This is at the time when they were still doing that. And then, all these different products listed for TSR. So, which, it's just really fun to see this. A product I never saw anything like this in another magazine. So I thought this was really cool. And then you can get a sense of the prices. The D&D basic set was $10. Dungeon Adventure game was $10. Divine Right was $10, but then you also have, all of your supplements for original D&D were all $6. I thought I bought mine for $5, but I could be wrong. But the D&D basic book, so that would be the Holmes basic book from the box set. If you just wanted the book, it was $5. D&D Collector's Edition by this point is now $12. That's the white box. That's what that means. And then your various D&D, advanced D&D handbooks are all $12, except for the Dungeon Master's Guide is $15. Gamma World was $10. I remember it being $12, but here it's $10. So anyway, you have all these different products listed. There's the Player's Handbook again and the Holmes Basic, all your different dice that you can get. And then what I thought was really fun, this is not part of the catalog, but on the back is an ad from TSR. And of all the things that they could have advertised in this, they advertised the Awful Green Things from Outer Space board game. So you see the TSR Wizard logo there. I thought that was a really interesting choice. They didn't take out a full page color ad for Dungeons and Dragons. They took it out for this board game. A relatively, I want to call it an obscure game. Obscure is probably not the right word, but clearly D&D was their best seller. So maybe that's why they put that on there, because they didn't feel that D&D needed the help. But anyway, it was really great to interact with Charlie. I had chatted with him before, but it was years ago. It was the last time I talked to him, was that time waiting in line. Like I said, 2016, 2017, whatever year that was. So it was really fun to connect with him again and talk with a viewer in the wild. And I will say, I know I don't get to a lot of conventions and stuff, but this video should come out on Tuesday, March 25th of 2025. And I am planning to be at WonderCon in Anaheim this Friday. Reason being is that I'm kind of helping chaperone and drive people from my daughter's school over there. So I volunteered to do that. But because I'm doing that, I will be able to go in just on Friday only in the afternoon and kind of check it out. So if you are planning to go to WonderCon, I will have my Daddy Rolled One t-shirt on with the logo, the glass with the the D20 olive and the Fantasy Sword olive pick on it. So I should be pretty easy to pick out of a crowd. And, if you're there, feel free to come up and say hi, as long as I'm not, chaperoning the kids and stuff. I think I get time to kind of just wander on my own. So, I enjoyed talking with fans and stuff when I get a chance. I had a great time meeting people at DaveCon last year, and I'm hoping to be able to do some more conventions like that in the near future once, I get my ad agency, another client for my agency, so that I have a little bit more of a, stable recurring source of income. All right. But that's going to be it for this video. So once again, I hope you really enjoyed it. Trying to help, people, bring people into the OSR kind of fold, but also help people find the kinds of games that they want to play. So with that, thanks once again for watching, and cheers. And I will talk to you next time.